Human baby reunion with his favorite bear cub. After 2 years, what happened next was shocking. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It'll help us to remain in touch with amazing people like you. The morning mist clung to the trees surrounding the small forest clearing, just as it had done that fateful day 2 years ago. Jacob Bennett pulled the car to a stop at the end of the dirt road, the familiar sight of the rustic wooden cabin bringing both comfort and a flutter of anxiety to his chest. His wife, Lily, turned to look at their son in the back seat. "Connor, we're here," she whispered, her voice catching slightly as her eyes met Jacob's. They both knew what this place meant. What had happened here when Connor was just a baby, barely able to crawl. Connor, now a curious 3-year-old with wild blonde curls and eyes that seemed to hold more wisdom than his years should allow, pressed his small hands against the window. "Is this where I met Rusty?" he asked, using the name they had given to the bear cub that had once changed their lives forever. Jacob nodded, unable to find words as memories flooded back. The image of his infant son, just over a year old, somehow communicating with a wounded bear cub in a way that defied explanation. The park rangers had called it a miracle. The internet had called it a hoax, but the Bennetts knew what they had witnessed. A connection that transcended the natural order, a moment of pure innocence that had saved both the cub and, in many ways, their family. "Yes, buddy," Jacob finally managed. "This is where you met Rusty." Connor unbuckled his seatbelt with surprising dexterity for a 3-year-old and bounced excitedly on his seat. "Will we see him again?" "Will he remember me?" Lily exchanged a worried glance with Jacob. They hadn't planned on trying to find the bear. In fact, they had purposely avoided this place for 2 years, afraid of what might happen if they returned. The bear would be much larger now, no longer a vulnerable cub, but an adolescent with powerful jaws and claws. Coming back had been Jacob's idea, a weekend getaway to the same cabin where they had once experienced something extraordinary, a chance to reconnect with each other after months of stress and long hours at work. "Honey," Lily began carefully, "Rusty is a wild animal. He's probably deep in the forest now, living his bear life. We can't expect to see him again." Connor's face fell, his lower lip trembling slightly. "But I drew him a picture." He pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his small backpack, a childish drawing of a boy and a bear holding hands, surrounded by colorful scribbles that were meant to be trees. Jacob felt his heart tighten. Connor had been obsessed with the bear ever since they had shown him the videos they had taken that day. Videos that had nearly gone viral until they had decided to keep them private, afraid of the attention it would bring their son. They had told Connor the story so many times that it had become almost like a fairy tale to him, something between reality and imagination. "Tell me the story again, Daddy," Connor said as Jacob lifted him from the car seat. "Tell me how I saved Rusty." Jacob hoisted Connor onto his hip and looked toward the forest's edge, where the trees stood like silent witnesses to what had happened before. "Well," he began, his voice dropping to the storytelling tone that Connor loved, "we were staying at this cabin because Mommy and I needed a break from the city. You were just a little baby, much smaller than you are now." "Was I this big?" Connor asked, holding his hand near his knee. "Even smaller," Jacob smiled. "One morning, while Mommy was sleeping, you and I were sitting on the porch. I was drinking coffee and you were playing with your blocks. Then I got a call from work and walked just a few steps away to talk." Connor nodded seriously, having heard this part many times. "And then I crawled away." "Yes, and nearly gave me a heart attack," Jacob continued, walking slowly toward the cabin with Lily following behind, carrying their bags. When I turned around, you were gone. I panicked and ran into the clearing, calling your name. And then you found me with Rusty, Connor finished proudly. Jacob paused, remembering the terror of that moment, seeing his baby son sitting in the grass face to face with a bear cub. He had been frozen in fear, unable to move or call out, certain he was about to witness something unthinkable. But what happened instead had changed him forever. Yes, Jacob said softly. The bear cub was hurt, his paw was bleeding, and he was making sad sounds. And somehow you knew just what to do. You were touching his face so gently, and he was letting you. When I finally got to you, I saw that there was a large thorn stuck in his paw, and I pulled it out, Connor said with satisfaction, though Jacob knew this part was an embellishment that had developed over countless retellings. In reality, Jacob had carefully removed the thorn, while the cub remained inexplicably calm in the presence of the baby. Well, Daddy helped a little, Jacob corrected gently. But yes, we got the thorn out, and Rusty licked your hand before running back to the woods. The park rangers told us later that he probably got separated from his mother. As they reached the cabin door, Jacob set Connor down and ruffled his hair. That's why we called him Rusty, remember? Because of his reddish-brown fur. Connor nodded solemnly, then turned to stare at the forest with a look of such longing that it made Jacob's chest ache. I'm going to find him, the boy declared, with the absolute certainty that only a 3-year-old could muster. He's my friend. Lily unlocked the cabin door and set down their bags. Connor, sweetheart, it's been 2 years. Rusty probably wouldn't even recognize you now. But Connor shook his head stubbornly. He'll know me. I know he will. As Jacob carried their luggage inside, he couldn't shake the feeling that coming back had been a mistake. Connor had built up this reunion in his mind, and the disappointment would be crushing when the bear didn't appear. Yet another part of him, the part that had witnessed something impossible 2 years ago, wondered if perhaps there was more magic in this world than he had ever dared to believe. The cabin was just as they remembered it. A simple 1-bedroom with a pull-out couch in the living area where Connor would sleep. The large windows overlooked the clearing where they had found Connor with the bear cub. As Lily unpacked their food in the small kitchen, Connor pressed his face against the glass, scanning the trees for any sign of movement. Do you think he misses me? Connor asked softly. Jacob placed a gentle hand on his son's shoulder. I don't know, buddy. Bears don't think like people do, but I'll never forget how peaceful he seemed when he was with you. It was like you two understood each other in a way that made no sense to anyone else. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and dark clouds began rolling in over the forest. Jacob checked his watch. Barely noon, but the sky was darkening rapidly. Looks like we're in for a storm. Good thing we got here when we did. As if on cue, fat raindrops began to splatter against the windows, and lightning flashed across the sky. Connor flinched and moved closer to Jacob, suddenly looking uncertain. Rusty doesn't like storms, the boy said firmly. He gets scared. Jacob exchanged another look with Lily. Connor often made declarations like this about the bear, as though he had some special insight into its feelings and thoughts. Usually, they gently corrected him, reminding him that he couldn't possibly know such things. But today, as the rain lashed against the cabin and the forest disappeared behind a curtain of water, Jacob simply nodded and said, Then let's hope he finds a dry place to wait it out. As the storm raged outside, Connor grew increasingly restless, moving from window to window, peering anxiously into the downpour. Jacob tried to distract him with games and stories, but the boy's mind was clearly elsewhere. "What if he's hurt again?" Connor asked during a particularly violent thunderclap. "What if he needs me?" Lily sat beside Connor on the window seat and pulled him into her lap. "Honey, Rusty is much bigger and stronger now. He knows how to take care of himself in the forest." But Connor wasn't comforted. Tears welled in his eyes as he stared into the storm. "I can feel him, Mommy. He's out there, and he's scared." Jacob felt a chill run up his spine at his son's words. There was something in Connor's voice, a certainty that went beyond childish imagination. For a moment, Jacob almost believed him. The storm continued well into the evening, forcing them to eat their dinner by lamplight when the power flickered and died. Connor picked at his food, unusually quiet, his eyes constantly drawn to the windows, even though there was nothing to see but darkness and rain. As they prepared for bed, tucking Connor onto the pull-out couch with his favorite stuffed animal, a bear, of course, the boy suddenly sat up straight, his eyes wide. "He's coming," Connor whispered, his voice barely audible over the rain. "Rusty is coming to find me." Jacob felt his skin prickle with goosebumps. "Connor, that's enough now. It's time to sleep." But Connor was already scrambling off the couch, pressing his face to the window beside the front door. "I can feel him, Daddy, just like before." Jacob was about to insist that Connor return to bed when a sound cut through the patter of rain, a low, rumbling growl from somewhere just beyond the porch. Lily gasped, clutching Jacob's arm with fingers that dug painfully into his skin. "Jacob," she breathed. "There's something out there." Connor showed no fear, only a quiet excitement that was somehow more terrifying than any screams would have been. "It's Rusty," he said simply. "He remembers me." And as lightning illuminated the night once more, Jacob caught a glimpse of a large, dark shape moving at the edge of the clearing, a shape much too big to be the small cub they had encountered 2 years ago. "Get away from the window," Jacob whispered urgently, pulling Connor back with one arm while fumbling for his phone with the other. The flashlight app cast a weak beam through the glass, but the rain distorted everything beyond the porch. Connor squirmed in his father's grip. "Daddy, stop! You're scaring him." "Jacob," Lily's voice trembled as she backed away. "We need to call someone. The ranger station." "No." Connor's protest was surprisingly forceful. He twisted free of Jacob's hold and pressed both palms against the window. "Please, Daddy, just wait." Something in his son's voice made Jacob pause. The same inexplicable certainty he'd heard 2 years ago, when he'd found his baby boy sitting face to face with a wounded bear cub. Back then, he'd thought it was a fluke, a moment of bizarre luck that had kept his son from harm. But now, "Connor, that's not the same bear," Jacob tried to reason, though he kept his voice gentle. "Even if it is Rusty, he's not a cub anymore. He's bigger, stronger." "I know," Connor interrupted, his eyes never leaving the darkness outside. "He grew up, just like me." Another flash of lightning revealed the shape more clearly, a young black bear, adolescent but already impressive in size, standing at the edge of the clearing. The rain had matted its fur, making it appear smaller than it truly was, but Jacob estimated it weighed at least 200 pounds now. Its head was raised, nose testing the air despite the downpour. "It's sniffing for us," Lily whispered, her fear palpable in the small cabin. "Do we have any food out?" Jacob shook his head. "Everything's packed away. I made sure of it." The bear took a hesitant step forward, then another, moving with surprising grace for such a powerful animal. Each flash of lightning traced its path as it approached the cabin, seemingly undeterred by the storm. "He remembers," Connor whispered, his breath fogging the glass. "He remembers this place." Jacob placed a protective hand on Connor's shoulder. "Buddy, we need to be smart about this. That's a wild animal out there." But Connor looked up at his father with eyes that reflected wisdom beyond his years. "He was always wild, Daddy. That didn't stop us from being friends." The bear was halfway across the clearing now, its attention fixed on the cabin. Jacob felt his heart hammering against his ribs as he calculated their options. The car was parked just outside, but making a run for it in the storm with a bear so close seemed foolish. The cabin's door was solid wood, but the windows were large and vulnerable. If the bear decided to investigate further. Just then, another sound rose above the storm, a high-pitched whine followed by the rumble of an engine. Headlights swept across the clearing as a vehicle turned onto the dirt road leading to the cabin. The bear froze, caught in the sudden glare, before bolting back toward the forest edge. Within seconds, it had disappeared into the trees, leaving only swaying branches as evidence it had ever been there. "No!" Connor cried, pressing his face against the glass. "Come back!" The approaching vehicle, a Forest Service truck, pulled up beside their car, and a figure in a rain slicker jumped out, rushing toward the cabin with a flashlight in hand. 3 sharp knocks rattled the door. "Hello? Anybody in there?" "Park Service." Jacob finally released the breath he hadn't realized he was holding and moved to open the door. A gust of rain-soaked wind burst into the cabin along with a tall woman in a dark green uniform, her ranger hat dripping onto the welcome mat. "Evening, folks," she said, removing her hat to reveal a face weathered by years outdoors. Her name tag read Ranger S. Reed. "Sorry to disturb you, but we're checking on all the cabins in the area. Got reports of unusual bear activity, and with this storm, we wanted to make sure everyone's safe." Lily stepped forward, one arm still protectively around Connor. "Actually, we just saw a bear, right outside, just before you arrived." Ranger Reed's expression sharpened. "Did it display any aggressive behavior? Try to get into the cabin?" "No," Jacob said, surprised to hear the disappointment in his own voice. "It was just looking. Then it ran when it saw your truck." The ranger pulled out a small notebook despite her wet hands. "Black bear? About how big would you say?" "Young adult," Jacob confirmed. "Maybe 2, 3 years old. Dark fur. Looked healthy from what we could see in the lightning." Connor tugged at the ranger's sleeve, his earlier shyness forgotten. "His name is Rusty. He's my friend. We helped him when he hurt his paw." Ranger Reed's eyebrows rose as she looked from Connor to his parents. A flash of recognition crossed her face. "Wait a minute. Are you the Bennetts, the family with the baby and the bear cub? That video almost broke the internet a couple years back." Jacob nodded, somewhat embarrassed. They had shared the video with only a few friends, but someone had posted it online where it had briefly gone viral before they'd managed to have it taken down. "That's us, though we tried to keep it quiet." "Well, I'll be," the ranger said, her professional demeanor softening slightly. That was something else. Never seen anything like it in 20 years on the job. She crouched down to Connor's level. "So you think that was the same bear, little man?" "I know it was," Connor insisted. "I could feel him in here." He tapped his chest solemnly. The ranger didn't laugh or dismiss him, which Jacob appreciated. Instead, she nodded thoughtfully. Bears have incredible memories, especially for places and people associated with food or safety. She looked up at Jacob and Lily. "Did you feed the cub back then?" "Absolutely not," Lily said quickly. "We know better. Jacob just removed a thorn from his paw while our son, well, somehow kept it calm." Ranger Reed straightened up, tucking her notebook away. Well, I'd advise you folks to stay inside tonight. This storm's supposed to get worse before it gets better, and that bear might come back if it associates this cabin with something positive. As if on cue, thunder boomed directly overhead, making them all jump. The lights flickered once more before steadying. "You got enough supplies?" the ranger asked. "Power tends to go out in these parts during storms like this." "We're fine for a few days," Jacob assured her. "Planned ahead." "Good." Ranger Reed moved back toward the door, then hesitated. "Look, I probably shouldn't tell you this, but there's been something strange going on with the bears in this area lately." Lily moved closer, her curiosity overcoming her fear. "Strange how?" "Changed behaviors. Bears that normally avoid human areas have been showing up near cabins, campsites. Not aggressive, just watching. Like they're looking for something." The ranger shook her head. "Probably nothing, but the research team's been tracking it for months now." "Or someone," Connor piped up. All three adults turned to look at him. "What did you say, honey?" Lily asked. "Maybe they're not looking for something," Connor said simply. "Maybe they're looking for someone." An uncomfortable silence fell over the cabin, broken only by the persistent drumming of rain on the roof. Ranger Reed cleared her throat. "Well, I should get going. Got more cabins to check." She handed Jacob a card. "My number's on there if you need anything or if that bear comes back. Try to get some photos if you can from inside the cabin. The research team would be interested." After the ranger left, Jacob double-checked the locks on the doors and windows. Connor had returned to his vigil by the window, eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. "Connor, it's bedtime," Lily said, though her voice lacked conviction. "The bear is gone now." "He'll come back," Connor replied with absolute certainty. "He's just waiting for the ranger lady to leave." Jacob and Lily exchanged worried glances. "Honey," Lily began carefully, "I think we should consider leaving tomorrow. This storm, the bear—" "No!" Connor's outburst surprised them both. He rarely raised his voice. "We can't leave, not when I just found Rusty again." "Connor, listen to me," Jacob said, crouching beside his son. "That bear out there isn't your little friend anymore. He's grown up, and wild animals can be dangerous, especially when they start hanging around people." Connor's lower lip trembled, but his eyes remained defiant. "You don't understand, Daddy. Nobody does. Rusty and we're the same." "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Lily asked, joining them by the window. Connor pressed his hand against the cold glass. "We both lost our moms." The statement hung in the air like a physical thing. Jacob felt as though someone had punched him in the chest, driving the air from his lungs. "Connor," he managed finally, "you didn't lose your mom." "Mommy is right here." But Connor shook his head. "Not Mommy Lily, my first mommy, the one in heaven." Jacob felt Lily's hand grip his arm, her nails digging into his skin. They had told Connor he was adopted, of course, but in simple terms appropriate for a 3-year-old. They had explained that another mommy had carried him in her tummy but couldn't take care of him, so she had chosen them to be his parents. They had never told him that his birth mother had died shortly after his birth from complications. That conversation was planned for when he was older. "Who told you that?" Lily whispered, her voice unsteady. Connor shrugged, still staring out at the rain. "Nobody. I just know. Like I know Rusty's mom is gone too. That's why he was all alone that day. That's why we found each other." Jacob felt a chill that had nothing to do with the storm. Connor couldn't possibly know about his birth mother's death, yet he spoke with such conviction. The same conviction with which he spoke about the bear. "You need to get some sleep, buddy," Jacob said, lifting Connor away from the window. "It's been a long day." This time, Connor didn't resist. He allowed himself to be carried to the pull-out couch and tucked beneath the blankets. But as Jacob turned to walk away, Connor caught his hand. "Daddy, promise we won't leave tomorrow? Promise we'll wait for Rusty?" Jacob hesitated, caught between his instinct to protect and the strange feeling that there was something important happening here, something beyond his understanding. "We'll see how the weather is," he compromised. "If it's safe, we can stay a little longer." Connor seemed satisfied with this, and closed his eyes, clutching his stuffed bear close to his chest. Within minutes, his breathing had deepened into sleep, the excitement of the day finally catching up with him. Jacob joined Lily in the small bedroom, closing the door part way so they could hear Connor if he woke. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, her face pale in the dim light of the battery-powered lantern. "How did he know, Jacob?" she whispered. "About his birth mother?" Jacob shook his head. "I don't know. Maybe he overheard us talking sometime, or maybe Dr. Mitchell mentioned something during one of Connor's checkups." "He couldn't have," Lily insisted. "We've been so careful. And that thing about the bear's mother, it's like he has some kind of connection." Jacob sat beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Hey, kids say weird things all the time. They mix up stories, fill in blanks with their imagination." But even as he said it, Jacob remembered that day 2 years ago, the impossible calm of the bear cub as it allowed him to remove the thorn, the way his baby son had seemed to communicate with the wild animal without words. He remembered the videos they'd taken, the ones that had briefly captivated the internet before they'd had them removed. The comments, "Unreal," "Fake," "Has to be trained." And from a few, "That child has a gift." "I'm scared, Jacob," Lily admitted, leaning into him. "Not of the bear, but what if Connor is right? What if there's some kind of connection between them? What does that mean for him?" Jacob had no answer. Instead, he held her tighter as the storm raged outside, rattling the windows and bending the trees. Eventually, they both lay down, though neither expected to sleep much. Hours later, Jacob was drifting in the liminal space between wakefulness and dreams when a sound jolted him fully awake. The creak of the cabin's front door opening and closing. He sat bolt upright, heart pounding. "Connor," he called, already knowing with terrible certainty that his son's bed would be empty. Lily stirred beside him. "What?" "Stay here," Jacob ordered, fumbling for his phone and the flashlight. He rushed into the main room to find the pull-out couch abandoned, the blankets thrown back and Connor's stuffed bear lying forgotten on the floor. The front door stood slightly ajar, rain and wind gusting through the gap. "Connor!" Jacob shouted, panic rising in his throat as he yanked the door fully open. The storm had intensified, the rain coming down in sheets so thick he could barely see 5 feet ahead. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the clearing for a brief, heart-stopping moment. And there, at the edge where forest met meadow, stood his 3-year-old son in his dinosaur pajamas, his small figure dwarfed by the massive shape beside him. The adolescent bear, its fur slick with rain, its body tensed as though ready to flee or fight. Connor's hand was outstretched, inches away from touching the bear's muzzle. "Connor!" Jacob's scream tore through the night, unheard by his son over the storm's fury. Lily appeared beside him, her scream joining his as she registered the nightmarish tableau before them. The sound finally reached Connor, who turned toward them with a smile of pure joy, rain plastering his blonde curls to his forehead. "Look, Daddy," he called, his voice small against the storm's rage. "I told you he'd come back for me." The bear's head swiveled toward Jacob and Lily, its eyes reflecting the cabin's light. In that moment, Jacob saw a flicker of recognition there. Not the mindless aggression he feared, but something more complex, more aware. Then, several things happened at once. Lightning struck a tree at the forest's edge, sending a resounding crack through the air and causing a massive branch to come crashing down. The bear reared up in fear, its massive form towering over Connor. And Jacob, operating on pure instinct, bolted into the storm toward his son. What happened next would haunt Jacob's dreams for years to come. Instead of fleeing or attacking, the bear dropped to all fours and nudged Connor, firmly but gently, away from the falling debris. The child stumbled backwards, falling safely onto the wet grass as the branch crashed down where he had been standing moments before. The bear turned once more toward the cabin, meeting Jacob's eyes as he skidded to a halt in the mud, unable to process what he had just witnessed. Then, with a final glance at Connor, the animal lumbered back into the forest, disappearing into the darkness as suddenly as it had appeared. Jacob scooped Connor into his arms, holding him so tightly that the boy squeaked in protest. "Daddy, you're squishing me!" "What were you thinking?" Jacob's voice shook with fear and relief as he carried Connor back toward the cabin where Lily waited, trembling in the doorway. "You could have been killed." "But I wasn't," Connor said calmly, as rain streamed down his face. "Rusty would never hurt me. He saved me from the tree." Jacob couldn't speak. He had seen it with his own eyes, yet his mind rebelled against the evidence. A wild bear, not a trained animal, not a zoo exhibit, but a creature of instinct and power, had protected his child. As they reached the safety of the cabin, Lily pulled Connor from Jacob's arms, alternating between covering him with kisses and reprimanding him through her tears. Jacob closed the door against the storm, his mind racing with questions that had no rational answers. "He was waiting for me," Connor was explaining excitedly to Lily as she toweled his hair dry. "He was calling me in my dream, telling me to come outside." "Connor, bears can't talk," Lily said, her voice strained as she struggled to maintain normalcy in the face of what had happened. "Not with words," Connor agreed seriously, "with feelings. Like how I always know when you're sad, even when you're smiling." Jacob leaned against the door, suddenly aware of how tired he was, how utterly unprepared for whatever was happening with his son and this bear. "He's special, Mommy," Connor continued. "The ranger lady was right. The bears are looking for someone. They're looking for me." "Why would they be looking for you, sweetheart?" Lily asked, her voice carefully neutral as she helped Connor into dry pajamas. Connor's answer sent another chill down Jacob's spine. "Because I'm the only one who can hear them," the boy said simply. "I'm the only one who can save them." Before Jacob or Lily could question this cryptic statement, a new sound cut through the storm, the aggressive honking of a car horn, followed by frantic pounding on their door. Jacob whirled around and opened it to find Ranger Reed on their porch, soaked to the skin and wide-eyed with panic. "Get your things," she ordered, her professional calm replaced by urgent fear. "You need to evacuate. Now." "What's happening?" Jacob asked, already moving to gather their essentials. "The dam up on Miller's Creek gave way. This whole valley's going to flood within the hour." The ranger's eyes landed on Connor, who was watching the exchange with unusual intensity. "Thank God you're all okay. I saw your door open when I drove up." "We're fine," Jacob interrupted, not ready to explain what had happened. "How bad is it going to be?" "Bad enough that I'm evacuating everyone within 5 miles of the creek. The road to the highway is still passable, but it won't be for long." She checked her watch. "We've got maybe 20 minutes before the worst of it hits here." As Lily hurriedly packed their overnight bags, Connor returned to the window, pressing his face against it despite the thunder that still rumbled overhead. "He's still out there," the boy whispered, "in the rain, with the flood coming." Jacob knelt beside his son, willing himself to stay calm despite the urgency of their situation. "Connor, we have to go now. Rusty will be fine. Bears know how to climb trees, remember. They can swim, too." But Connor shook his head, tears welling in his eyes. "Not all of them, Daddy, not the little ones." "Little ones?" Ranger Reed had overheard as she helped Lily with their bags. "What's he talking about?" Connor turned to the ranger, his expression eerily adult. "Rusty has a family now. There are cubs in the den by the big rock. They'll drown when the water comes." The ranger froze, staring at Connor with growing unease. "How could you possibly know that?" "We've been tracking a female bear with new cubs in this area, but their den location is classified information." "I told you," Connor said patiently, as though explaining something obvious. "Rusty told me. In here." He tapped his chest again. Ranger Reed looked to Jacob and Lily for explanation, but they had none to offer. "He has an active imagination," Jacob said weakly. "Connor, honey, we need to go now." "No!" Connor's voice rose with an edge of panic. "We have to help them. Please, Daddy. The water's coming and they'll die." The desperation in his son's voice tore at Jacob's heart. The rational part of him knew they needed to evacuate immediately, to trust that wildlife would fend for itself as it had done for millennia before humans intervened. But another part, the part that had seen a bear protect his child from falling debris not 20 minutes ago, wasn't so sure. Ranger Reed was checking something on her phone, her expression growing more troubled. "The den location he described, it is in the flood path. If there are cubs there—" She trailed off, clearly conflicted between her duty to evacuate humans and her dedication to the wildlife she'd sworn to protect. "We can't just leave them," Connor pleaded, tears now streaming down his face. "They're scared, I can feel it." Jacob looked from his son to the ranger to Lily, who stood with their packed bags, her face a mask of confusion and fear. Outside, the rain continued to pound against the cabin, and in the distance, Jacob thought he could hear a new sound beneath the storm, the faint roar of surging water. Their time was running out, and a decision had to be made. Trust his son's impossible connection with a wild animal, or trust the rational world that said such things couldn't exist? As if in answer, lightning flashed once more, and through the window, all four of them saw it. The bear, Rusty, standing at the edge of the clearing again. But this time, it wasn't watching the cabin. It was looking back over its shoulder toward the forest, then back at them, its behavior so unmistakably purposeful that even Ranger Reed gasped. "It wants us to follow," she whispered, her ranger training momentarily forgotten in the face of something that defied explanation. Connor nodded, a sudden calm replacing his panic. "Yes, he'll show us where they are." He looked up at Jacob with complete trust. "Please, Daddy. You always said we should help others when they can't help themselves." Jacob felt the weight of his son's words, of his unwavering belief. He looked to Lily, expecting to see resistance, but instead found a resigned determination in her eyes. "If we're doing this," she said quietly, "we need to do it now." Jacob turned to Ranger Reed. "Is there any way to reach this den without putting ourselves in immediate danger from the flood?" The ranger hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "If we take my truck up the service road, we can get close enough to approach from higher ground. But we'd have minutes at most before the water reaches that area." "Then that's what we'll do," Jacob decided, surprised by the certainty in his own voice. He lifted Connor into his arms. "But you stay with us every second, understand? No running off, no approaching the bear without the Ranger's okay." Connor nodded solemnly. "I promise, Daddy." As they hurried toward the Ranger's truck, and the rain still coming down in sheets around them, Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that they were crossing a threshold into something unknown. A world where the boundaries between human and animal understanding were not as fixed as he had always believed. At the edge of the clearing, the bear waited, its dark form barely visible in the storm. But as they approached, it began to move, leading them toward whatever lay ahead in the darkness of the forest. The Ranger's truck lurched over the uneven terrain, wipers struggling against the relentless downpour. Inside the cab, Connor sat wedged between Jacob and Lily in the back seat, his small body vibrating with anxious energy. Ranger Reed navigated the treacherous service road with practiced skill, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. "How much farther?" Jacob asked, straining to see through the rain-slicked windows. The headlights caught only sheets of water and the occasional tree trunk as they climbed higher into the forest. "If he's talking about the den, I think he is. It's about a quarter-mile ahead," Ranger Reed replied, her voice tight with concentration. "There's a limestone outcropping that forms a natural shelter. Perfect for a bear den, but it's dangerously close to the creek bed." Connor leaned forward, peering through the windshield. "We need to hurry. The water's getting higher." As if confirming his words, the truck's tires splashed through a puddle that hadn't been there minutes before. The roar of the distant flood was growing louder, an ominous backdrop to the storm's fury. "There!" Connor suddenly pointed through the passenger window. Impossibly, through the curtain of rain, they could make out the dark silhouette of the bear, keeping pace with the truck about 50 yards away through the trees. It moved with surprising speed for an animal its size, stopping occasionally to look back as if ensuring they were following. "This is insane," Lily whispered half to herself. "We're following a bear in a flash flood to save cubs that we don't even know are really there." Jacob squeezed her hand, finding it ice cold. "I know, but you saw what happened back there. That bear protected Connor." "That doesn't make any of this rational," she replied, though there was no real argument in her voice, only fear and a grudging acceptance of the impossible situation they found themselves in. The truck rounded a bend, and Ranger Reed suddenly slammed on the brakes, sending them all lurching forward. "End of the road. We'll have to continue on foot." Outside, the rain continued to pound, but the trees were thicker here, providing some minimal shelter. In the distance, the ominous sound of rushing water had grown louder. "How much time do we have?" Jacob asked as they climbed out of the truck. Ranger Reed checked her phone, squinting at the emergency alert. "The flood surge is moving faster than expected, maybe 15 minutes before it reaches this elevation." She reached into the back of the truck and pulled out emergency rain ponchos, handing them around before shouldering a backpack. "I've got basic wildlife rescue equipment, but moving bear cubs is dangerous work even for professionals." Lily helped Connor into his poncho, which hung to his ankles like a bright yellow tent. "Stay between Daddy and me the whole time, understand?" Connor nodded solemnly, but his attention was already elsewhere. He was scanning the tree line, his expression one of intense concentration. "This way," he said finally, pointing toward a barely visible trail that wound between two massive pines. "Rusty says it's the fastest way." Jacob exchanged another look with Lily. The casual way Connor spoke about communicating with the bear was becoming more unsettling, not less, with each passing moment. "I'll lead," Ranger Reed said firmly, pulling a powerful flashlight from her belt. "You all stay close behind me. If we see the bear again, nobody approaches it without my okay. Are we clear?" They all nodded, though Jacob noticed Connors was less enthusiastic than his parents. The path was slippery with mud and fallen leaves, forcing them to move slowly despite the urgency of their mission. Water was already beginning to pool in the lower areas, small rivulets becoming streams before their eyes as the rain continued to fall. "Your son," Ranger Reed said quietly to Jacob as they picked their way forward, "has he always had this affinity for animals?" Jacob thought about it, memories flashing through his mind. Connor talking to birds in the backyard, the stray cats that always seemed to find their way to him in the neighborhood, the injured rabbit that had let him stroke its fur when it had snapped at everyone else who tried. "Yes," he admitted, "though nothing like this. Nothing this extreme." The ranger nodded thoughtfully. "My grandfather was Pueblo. He would have called your son a medicine child, someone with a special connection to the natural world." She glanced back at Connor, who was walking between his parents, his eyes constantly scanning the forest around them. "In our stories, such children were both blessed and burdened. They could communicate with animals in ways others couldn't, but it meant they never fully belonged to the human world." A chill that had nothing to do with the rain crept up Jacob's spine. "Connor belongs with us," he said, more sharply than he'd intended. Ranger Reed's expression softened. "Of course he does. I'm just saying, what he can do, what we're witnessing tonight, it's special, and it might be worth listening to him more often than your logical mind wants to." Before Jacob could respond, Connor let out a small gasp. "He's here!" Sure enough, the bear had appeared on the path ahead of them, water streaming from its dark fur. It stood on its hind legs momentarily, towering to a height of at least 6 feet, before dropping back to all fours. Its eyes reflected the beam of the ranger's flashlight, 2 glowing orbs in the darkness. Ranger Reed held out an arm, stopping their advance. "Everyone stay still," she ordered quietly. But Connor was already moving, ducking under her arm and taking several steps forward before anyone could stop him. "Connor!" Lily's panicked cry rang out over the storm. The bear didn't move, its gaze fixed on the small boy approaching. Connor stopped about 10 feet away, just staring at the animal. For a moment, that seemed to stretch into eternity. Boy and bear regarded each other in silence. Then Connor turned to face the adults. "He says we're close, but the water is already starting to fill the lower part of the den. We need to hurry." Jacob started to move forward to grab his son, but Ranger Reed's hand on his arm stopped him. "Wait," she murmured. "Look at the bear's body language. It's not threatening, it's waiting." Indeed, the bear had turned and was looking back over its shoulder expectantly, much as it had done at the cabin. When no one moved, it took a few steps along the path, then looked back again. "See?" Connor said, as though this was the most natural thing in the world. "He's showing us the way." "This is crazy," Lily whispered, her face pale beneath her hood. "Jacob, we can't—" "I think we have to," Jacob replied, the words surprising him even as he spoke them. He looked to Ranger Reed. "You're the professional. What do you think?" The ranger's expression was conflicted, torn between her training and what she was witnessing. "In 20 years, I've never seen a bear behave like this, but wild animals do sometimes seek human help when they're in distress." She adjusted her backpack. "We follow, but at a safe distance, and at the first sign of aggression, we retreat immediately." They continued along the path, now with the bear as their guide. It moved with purpose, occasionally glancing back to ensure they were still following. The terrain became steeper, the path narrower as they climbed toward the limestone outcropping Ranger Reed had mentioned. The sound of water was louder here, a continuous roar that seemed to surround them. Jacob could see that small streams were already forming on either side of the path, growing wider by the minute, as the rain-saturated ground could no longer absorb the deluge. "The flood's coming faster than I thought," Ranger Reed shouted over the noise. "We need to hurry." The bear suddenly increased its pace, moving with urgency now. Connor, seemingly understanding, tried to run after it, but Lily caught him by the poncho. "Stay with us," she insisted, her voice sharp with fear. "But we're almost there," Connor protested, pointing ahead where the bear had disappeared around a bend in the path. They hurried forward as quickly as they dared on the slippery terrain. Rounding the bend, they found themselves facing a sheer rock face about 20 feet high. At its base, partially hidden by fallen logs and brush, was a dark opening, the den. The bear stood beside it, pacing anxiously. But what made Jacob's heart sink was the water already seeping into the den's entrance, a dark pool that was visibly rising even as they watched. "We're too late," Lily breathed, unconsciously tightening her grip on Connor's hand. "No, we're not," Ranger Reed countered, already shrugging off her backpack. "If the cubs are on a ledge inside, they might still be dry. Bears often build their dens with raised sleeping areas." She pulled out a small thermal imaging device from her pack, pointing it toward the den opening. "I'm picking up heat signatures, at least 2, maybe 3 smaller forms inside." She looked at the bear, which was still pacing agitatedly near the entrance. "That's likely the mother, which means this fellow." She gestured to the bear that had led them there. "It's probably her mate or a related male." "Rusty's their dad," Connor stated with certainty. "He came to get us because their mom is trapped." "Trapped?" Jacob repeated. As if in answer, a low, pained growl emerged from the den, distinct from the rushing water and rain. It was a sound of distress, of an animal in trouble. Ranger Reed's expression hardened into professional determination. "I need to go in there. If the mother is injured or trapped, the cubs won't leave her, and they'll all drown when the water rises." "Is that safe?" Lily asked, eyeing the male bear, which had moved closer to the den entrance. "No," the ranger admitted frankly. "But I've done bear rescues before. If the mother's already weakened or injured, she might be less aggressive, especially if she understands we're trying to help." "She knows," Connor said quietly. "Rusty told her about us." All 3 adults looked at the boy, who returned their stares with perfect innocence. Jacob was struck again by the surreal nature of the situation, standing in a flash flood, discussing bear communication with his 3-year-old as though it were perfectly normal. "Right," Ranger Reed said after a moment, clearly deciding not to question this any further. "I'll go in first with the thermal imager. Mr. Bennett, if you're willing, I could use your help, but I won't ask you to risk—" "I'll come," Jacob said immediately. The thought of entering a bear den terrified him, but the alternative, standing helplessly outside while cubs drowned, was somehow worse. "Jacob, no," Lily protested, grabbing his arm. "What about Connor? What if something happens to you?" Jacob looked into his wife's frightened eyes, then at his son, who was watching the exchange with strange calmness. "Connor needs to see that we help those in need, even when it's scary." He squeezed Lily's hand. "I'll be careful. We both will." Ranger Reed was already pulling additional equipment from her pack. A tranquilizer gun, which she checked and placed in a holster at her hip, a first aid kit, and several large canvas bags. "These are for the cubs if we need to move them," she explained, handing 2 to Jacob. "They're designed to keep them calm during transport." She looked at Lily and Connor. "You 2 need to stay back, at least 20 feet from the entrance. If things go wrong, get back to the truck as fast as you can." Lily nodded, drawing Connor back despite his obvious reluctance. The water around the den entrance was now ankle-deep and rising steadily. Jacob followed Ranger Reed toward the den, his heart pounding in his ears. The male bear, Rusty, as Connor insisted on calling it, stepped aside as they approached, its behavior so unbear-like that Jacob wondered if he was dreaming this entire bizarre night. "Stay behind me," Ranger Reed instructed as they reached the entrance, "and if I say run, you run." No hesitation. Jacob nodded, his mouth too dry for words. The ranger switched her powerful flashlight to a red filtered setting. "Less startling to the bears," she explained, before ducking into the narrow opening. Jacob took one last look at Lily and Connor, his wife's face tight with fear, his sons alight with something like wonder, before following the ranger into the darkness. The den was larger inside than it appeared from the outside, the ceiling high enough for Jacob to stand upright, though he remained crouched, following Ranger Reed's example. The air was thick with the musky scent of bear and the damp smell of earth and stone. Water flowed steadily around their ankles, the level noticeably higher than it had been moments before. Ranger Reed's red-filtered light swept the space, revealing a chamber roughly 15 feet deep and 10 feet wide. At the back, on a raised shelf of rock about 2 feet above the current water level, lay a large female black bear. Her breathing was labored, and Jacob could see why immediately. A fallen tree branch had pierced her side, pinning her to the ground. Around her, making soft whimpering sounds, were 3 small cubs, each no bigger than a household cat. "My God," Ranger Reed breathed. "She's been impaled by that branch. Probably happened during the storm, maybe a lightning strike that shattered the tree." The mother bear's eyes gleamed in the red light, watching them warily but making no move to attack. Whether from weakness or some impossible understanding, Jacob couldn't tell. "What do we do?" he whispered, unable to tear his gaze from the pitiful scene. Ranger Reed's professional demeanor faltered for just a moment. "Normally, I'd tranquilize her and call for backup with proper equipment, but we don't have time." She gestured to the water, which had risen another inch just in the short time they'd been inside. "We need to move the cubs now and—" She hesitated. "We should end her suffering. She can't be saved with the equipment I have, and she's in pain." The enormity of the situation hit Jacob like a physical blow. They had come to save the cubs, but the mother bear would have to be left behind, or worse, euthanized to spare her a slower death by drowning. "Isn't there anything we can do for her?" he asked, his voice breaking slightly. The ranger shook her head grimly. "Not with what we have, and not with a flood coming. The kindest thing would be a tranquilizer overdose. She'd go peacefully." Before Jacob could respond, a small voice spoke from behind them, causing both adults to whirl around in shock. "Number, we can save her too." Connor stood at the entrance to the den, water swirling around his yellow rain boots, his expression solemn beyond his years. "Connor!" Jacob's fear came out as anger. "I told you to stay with Mom." "She's trying to reach the ranger on the radio," Connor explained calmly. "The water's getting too high on the path. We need to find another way out." He walked forward, seemingly unafraid of the injured bear or the rising water. "We need to help all of them, Daddy. That's why Rusty brought us here." Jacob moved to intercept his son, to drag him back to safety, but Connor sidestepped him with surprising agility, approaching the injured mother bear and her cubs. Jacob's heart nearly stopped. "Connor, don't—" Ranger Reed's warning died in her throat as something extraordinary happened. The mother bear, who by all logic should have attacked to protect her cubs from the approaching human, simply watched as Connor came closer. The cubs, sensing no threat from their mother, continued their soft whimpering, but made no move to flee. Connor reached out a small hand toward the nearest cub, which sniffed his fingers curiously. "They're scared," he said softly, "but they trust us because Rusty told them to." He looked back at the stunned adults. "We need to take the branch out so she can stand. Then Rusty can help her walk." Jacob and Ranger Reed exchanged incredulous glances. "That's not possible," the ranger said carefully. "The branch has likely punctured vital organs. Removing it could cause her to bleed out instantly." "No," Connor said with that same eerie certainty. "It went through the loose skin on her side. It looks worse than it is." Ranger Reed frowned, moving closer with her light to examine the injury more carefully. After a long moment, she let out a surprised breath. "He's right. The branch has pierced the loose skin and muscle of her side, but it seems to have missed any vital organs." She looked at Connor with renewed wonder. "How did you know that?" Connor shrugged. "Rusty told me. He can feel what she feels." The water was now halfway up their calves and rising faster. They had minutes at most before the den would be completely flooded. "Even if the injury isn't immediately fatal, she's still too weak to move on her own," Ranger Reed said, thinking aloud. "And we can't carry a full-grown bear." "Rusty will help her," Connor repeated. "We just need to free her and take care of the cubs until they're safe." Jacob watched his son speaking with such conviction and felt something shift within him, a willingness to believe in the impossible because the alternative was to give up. "What do you need us to do?" he asked Ranger Reed. The ranger hesitated only briefly before her training took over. "We need to immobilize her enough to safely remove the branch, then bandage the wound to slow the bleeding." She reached for her tranquilizer gun. "A light dose, just enough to keep her calm while we work." As she prepared the tranquilizer, Jacob gathered the canvas bags she had brought for the cubs. "Connor, can you help me get the cubs into these? They'll be safer if we carry them." Connor nodded, and to Jacob's continued amazement, began gently coaxing the cubs away from their mother. The tiny bears resisted at first, but when the mother made no sound of protest, they allowed Connor to guide them one by one into the bags, their small heads poking out curiously. Meanwhile, Ranger Reed had administered the tranquilizer to the mother bear, which took effect quickly, causing her eyes to grow heavy though she remained conscious. "Now for the hard part," the ranger muttered, examining where the branch had pierced the bear's side. It was about 2 inches thick and had gone clean through the loose skin and muscle just behind her front leg. "When I pull this out, there will be bleeding. I need you to immediately apply pressure with this." She handed Jacob a compression bandage from her kit. Jacob handed the bags containing the cubs to Connor, who held them with surprising competence, whispering reassurances to the small creatures. "Ready?" Ranger Reed positioned herself to pull the branch free. Jacob nodded, his hands poised with the bandage. With a single smooth motion, the ranger extracted the branch from the bear's flesh. Blood immediately began to flow, but Jacob pressed the bandage firmly against both the entry and exit wounds. The bear let out a low moan but didn't struggle. "Good," Ranger Reed encouraged, quickly applying a second bandage and securing both with the wraps that went around the bear's substantial girth. "She's lucky. The branch acted like a plug. Now that it's out, she'll be able to move, but she'll be weak from blood loss and the tranquilizer." The water had risen to their knees now, and a new sound reached them from outside, Lily's voice, calling urgently over the storm and rushing water. "Jacob, Connor, you need to get out now. The road is completely flooded." "We're coming!" Jacob shouted back, gathering 2 of the bags with cubs from Connor while the ranger collected her equipment. "What about the mother?" Jacob asked, glancing at the large bear, which was now trying to stand despite her injury and the effects of the tranquilizer. As if in answer to his question, a large shape appeared at the den entrance. The male bear, Rusty, water streaming from its fur as it waded into the den. Without hesitation, it moved to the female's side, nudging her gently until she managed to find her footing. Ranger Reed stepped back, her expression a mixture of professional awe and personal disbelief. "I've never, in all my years," she stammered. "Told you," Connor said simply. "Rusty will help her. We need to go before the water gets too high." They waded out of the den, the water now reaching mid-thigh on the adults and dangerously high on Connor. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but the immediate threat was the rapidly rising floodwater, which was transforming the forest floor into a churning river. Lily rushed to them as they emerged, her face tight with panic. "The path back to the truck is completely underwater. We're cut off." Ranger Reed quickly surveyed their surroundings, her training kicking in. "We need to get to higher ground immediately. The flood surge is coming faster than predicted." She pointed to a rocky slope about 50 yards away. "If we can reach those rocks, we can climb above the flood line." Jacob looked down at the bags in his hands, each containing a frightened bear cub. What about them? And their parents? The mother bear had managed to exit the den, leaning heavily against her mate for support as they stood watching the humans with their cubs. "We take the cubs with us," Ranger Reed decided. "The adults should be able to swim and climb to safety if they're strong enough. Once we're all safe, we can figure out how to reunite them." But Connor was shaking his head. We need to stay together. All of us." He looked at his father with those wise, strange eyes. "Rusty knows another way, a dry path to higher ground." Jacob felt torn between trust in his son's inexplicable connection to the bear and the rational fear that they were running out of time. The water was rising visibly around them, and in the distance they could hear the ominous roar of the main flood surge approaching. Lily grabbed Jacob's arm, her fingers digging in painfully. "Jacob, we need to go now. Whatever we're doing, we decide right now." Jacob looked from his wife to his son to the ranger, then finally to the 2 adult bears standing patiently in the rising water, as if waiting for their decision. In that moment, the choice became clear. "We follow Rusty," he said firmly. "All of us, together." Ranger Reed looked like she wanted to object, but instead gave a short nod. "Your call." "But we move fast." The male bear seemed to understand the decision immediately. It turned and began to move along the base of the rock face, finding a narrow path that wasn't yet submerged. The female followed, moving slowly but steadily despite her injury. "Let's go," Jacob said, holding the bags with the cubs carefully as he waded after the bears. Connor took Lily's hand, leading her with perfect confidence through the rising water. "It's okay, Mommy. Rusty won't let anything bad happen to us." Lily's expression was one of pure maternal terror as water swirled around her son's chest, but she held tightly to his hand and followed. Ranger Reed brought up the rear, her practiced eye constantly scanning for dangers in the changing terrain. The path the bear found for them hugged the rock face, gradually rising above the water level as they moved along it. The going was treacherous, slippery rock underfoot, the storm still raging around them, and the roar of the approaching flood growing ever louder. But the bear moved with certainty, finding footholds where none seemed to exist, waiting when necessary for the humans to catch up. After what seemed like an eternity, but was probably only 10 minutes, they found themselves on a wide ledge about 20 feet above what had become a raging river below. The ledge extended back into a shallow cave, providing shelter from the worst of the rain. "We should be safe here until the water recedes," Ranger Reed assessed, shining her light around the space. "Good call, Mr. Bennett." Jacob shook his head, still processing what had happened. "It wasn't my call, it was Connor's." He looked at his son, who was already helping to open the bags containing the bear cubs. Somehow he knew. The cubs tumbled out onto the dry stone, immediately scampering to their mother, who had collapsed at the back of the cave. Her breathing labored but steady. The male bear, Rusty, stood guard at the cave entrance, occasionally glancing back as if to ensure everyone was safe. Lily sank to the ground, pulling Connor into a fierce hug. "Don't you ever scare me like that again," she whispered into his wet hair. "When I saw you go into that den, I had to, Mommy," Connor replied simply. "They needed us." Jacob crouched beside them, wrapping his arms around his family, overwhelmed with relief that they were all safe and together. The enormity of what they had just experienced was beginning to sink in. The impossible communication between his son and the bears, the rescue that defied all logic and natural law. Ranger Reed was on her radio, her voice professional despite the extraordinary circumstances. "This is Ranger Reed. I've got a family of 4 sheltering at the limestone caves on the East Ridge. We're above the flood line and secure for now." She paused, listening to the response. "Yes, and I also have an injured adult female black bear with 3 cubs. I'll need wildlife rescue assistance once the water recedes." Another pause. "No, they're not an immediate threat. Situation is stable." She clicked off the radio and turned to the Bennetts. "Rescue teams are focusing on the campgrounds first. It'll be morning before they can reach us, but we're safe here." Jacob nodded, still holding his family close. "Thank you. For everything. For believing us. For helping with the bears." The ranger's professional demeanor softened. "In my 20 years as a ranger, I've never witnessed anything like what I saw tonight." She looked at Connor, who was now watching the bear cubs with quiet contentment. "Your son has a gift, a rare and precious one." "What happens now?" Lily asked, her practical nature asserting itself now that the immediate danger had passed. "With the bears, I mean, will they be relocated?" Ranger Reed sighed. "That's standard procedure for bears that have close human contact. For their safety and ours." She watched as the mother bear tended to her cubs, the male still standing sentry at the cave entrance. "But this is anything but a standard situation. I'll have to make a full report, but—" She hesitated. "Let's just say I might leave out certain details that would be difficult to explain." Jacob understood what she was saying. A report detailing a bear that led humans to rescue other bears, that communicated through a 3-year-old boy. It would be dismissed as the ravings of people traumatized by the flood and storm. "What about the mother?" Jacob asked. "Will she recover?" "With proper treatment, yes. The wound was clean, and we got to her in time." Ranger Reed's gaze shifted to Connor. "Thanks to your son." Connor had moved away from his parents and was now sitting cross-legged about 5 feet from the mother bear and her cubs. He wasn't touching them, just watching with peaceful interest as the cubs nursed and the mother rested. "Connor always had a way with animals," Lily said quietly, watching her son. "Even before tonight. Birds would land on his stroller. Cats would follow him down the street. We thought it was cute, but this—" She shook her head in wonder. "This is something else entirely." Jacob thought about what Ranger Reed had said earlier, about medicine children who could communicate with animals, who never fully belonged to the human world. The idea both fascinated and terrified him. What did it mean for Connor's future, for their family? As if sensing his thoughts, Connor looked up at that moment, his eyes meeting Jacob's across the cave. In them, Jacob saw not the otherworldly wisdom that had guided them through the night, but simply his little boy, tired, wet, but happy to have helped his animal friends. "Daddy," Connor called, his voice small in the vast space. "Rusty wants to say thank you." Jacob glanced at the male bear, still standing at the cave entrance, its massive form silhouetted against the storm outside. As if on cue, the bear turned its head, meeting Jacob's gaze with those intelligent eyes that seemed to hold more understanding than any wild animal should possess. In that moment, Jacob felt something pass between them. Not words or thoughts, but a simple acknowledgement, an understanding that transcended species, a connection forged through the impossible events of this night. "You're welcome," Jacob whispered, knowing it was absurd to speak to a bear, but no longer caring. The bear held his gaze for a moment longer before turning back to watch over the floodwaters below. As the storm continued to rage outside their shelter, Jacob moved to sit beside Connor near the bears, Lily joining them a moment later. Ranger Reed maintained a respectful distance, alternating between monitoring the radio for updates and observing the extraordinary tableau before her. "Will they be okay?" Connor asked softly, looking at the mother bear and her cubs. "Will they let them stay in the forest?" Jacob exchanged a glance with the Ranger Reed, who gave a small nod. "I think so, buddy," he said, hoping it wasn't a lie. "Ranger Reed will make sure of it." Connor seemed satisfied with this answer, leaning against Jacob's side with a contented sigh. "Good, because Rusty wants his family to grow up here, where they belong." "And where do you belong, Connor?" Lily asked gently, stroking her son's damp hair. Connor looked up at her with perfect innocence. "With you and Daddy, but also with them sometimes." He gestured to the bears. "I can help them, and they can help me. That's what friends do." Jacob felt his throat tighten with emotion. His son's world was expanding in ways he had never imagined possible, reaching beyond human boundaries into the natural world, forming connections that defied explanation. It was beautiful and terrifying all at once. "Yes," he managed finally. "That's exactly what friends do." As the night wore on, the storm gradually began to ease, the torrential rain softening to a steady drizzle. The flood waters below their shelter reached their peak, and then slowly began to recede, revealing the devastation left in their wake. Uprooted trees, shifted boulders, transformed landscapes. Connor eventually fell asleep, nestled between his parents, his small body finally surrendering to exhaustion. The bear cubs, too, had drifted off, curled against their mother, whose breathing had steadied as she rested. "What happens tomorrow?" Lily whispered to Jacob over their sleeping son's head. Jacob looked out at the clearing sky, where stars were beginning to appear between the dispersing clouds. "I don't know, but I think our lives just changed in ways we can't even begin to understand." Lily nodded, her expression a mixture of worry and wonder. "He's still our little boy." "Yes," Jacob agreed, watching Connor sleep peacefully. "But he's also something more. Something special." At the cave entrance, the bear named Rusty remained vigilant, its powerful form a silhouette against the night sky. Guardian of two families now intertwined by an encounter that defied all rational explanation. A connection that would continue to shape their lives in ways none of them could predict. As dawn began to break over the forest, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, Jacob realized that what had begun as a simple weekend getaway had become something profoundly life-altering. Their son's reunion with his bear friend had indeed been shocking. Not because of danger or drama, but because it had opened a door to a world where the boundaries between human and animal were not as fixed as they had believed. A world where a boy could speak with bears, and bears could lead humans to safety. A world of endless possibility and wonder. 6 months had passed since that extraordinary night in the forest. The Bennett family's life had fallen into a new rhythm, forever changed by their experience during the flood. The morning sun streamed through the windows of their suburban home as Jacob prepared breakfast, the sizzle of pancakes filling the kitchen with a comforting aroma. Lily sat at the table reviewing work documents, occasionally glancing up to check on Connor, who was sitting cross-legged in the backyard. "He's doing it again," she said quietly, nodding toward their son. Jacob moved to the window, spatula still in hand. Connor was surrounded by a small gathering of woodland creatures, 2 squirrels, a rabbit, and several birds perched nearby. He wasn't touching them or even speaking aloud, just sitting peacefully as the animals went about their business, seemingly comfortable in his presence. "It's happening more frequently now," Jacob observed, returning to the stove. "Dr. Michaels says it's good for him to embrace this ability, as long as we provide structure." The child psychologist they had consulted, one recommended discreetly by Ranger Reed, had been surprisingly open-minded about Connor's gift, suggesting they nurture rather than suppress it. "I know," Lily sighed, closing her laptop. "I just worry about him starting kindergarten next year. Kids can be cruel when someone's different." Jacob flipped the last pancake onto a plate. "Connor's strong. Stronger than we ever realized." He set the plate on the table. "And he has us." The back door slid open, and Connor bounded in, his face flushed with excitement. "Daddy, Mom, guess what? Mr. Whiskers says there's going to be a new family of foxes moving into the woods behind our house." Mr. Whiskers was the elderly squirrel that had become a regular visitor to their yard. Jacob and Lily had stopped questioning how Connor knew such things. His predictions about local wildlife had proven accurate too many times to dismiss. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Lily smiled, helping him wash his hands. "Now, breakfast is ready. We have a big day ahead of us." Today was special, their monthly visit to the forest preserve where Ranger Reed worked. After the flood, as promised, she had ensured the bear family remained in their natural habitat, establishing a protected zone around their territory. She had also, true to her word, submitted a report that highlighted the extraordinary rescue, while tactfully omitting the more inexplicable elements of Connor's involvement. The drive to the preserve took just over an hour, Connor chattering excitedly the entire way. He wore his special forest clothes, sturdy boots, light hiking pants, and a jacket with extra pockets for the small notebooks where he recorded his observations about animal behavior. "Do you think Rusty remembers the promise I made last time?" Connor asked as they pulled into the visitor center parking lot. "I'm sure he does, buddy," Jacob replied, exchanging a smile with Lily. Connor's conviction that he could make and keep promises with wild animals had become a familiar part of their lives. Ranger Reed was waiting for them at the trailhead, her weathered face breaking into a warm smile as Connor ran toward her. "There's my favorite junior ranger. Ready for our adventure today?" Connor nodded enthusiastically. "Is Dr. Morgan coming too?" Dr. Lily Morgan, a wildlife biologist from the State University, had been introduced to Connor 3 months ago. Initially skeptical about Ranger Reed's claims regarding the boy's abilities, she had quickly become fascinated after witnessing Connor interact with various animals at the preserve. "She's meeting us at the observation point," Ranger Reed confirmed. "She's very excited about today's visit." The observation point was a carefully constructed blind about half a mile from the bear's current territory. It allowed them to observe without disturbing the animals. though, as they had discovered, the bears seemed well aware of their presence regardless of how quiet they remained. As they hiked the familiar trail, Ranger Reed updated them on the bear's progress. The mother has completely recovered from her injury. The cubs are growing fast, almost 3 times the size they were during the flood. And Rusty. She hesitated, still uncomfortable using the bear's nickname despite months of acquaintance. The male continues to display unusual behavior patterns. Unusual how? Lily asked, helping Connor over a fallen log. He patrols the boundaries of their territory every morning at sunrise, but once a month, on the day you visit, she shook her head in wonder. He appears near the observation point, almost like he's expecting you. Connor nodded solemnly. Because he is. I told him we'd come back every month to check on them. Jacob had stopped questioning these statements. Whether his son was truly communicating with the bears or simply projecting his own desires onto their behavior patterns didn't matter anymore. The connection was real, whatever its nature. They reached the observation point, where Dr. Morgan was already setting up her equipment. Cameras with powerful zoom lenses, a thermal imaging device, and audio recording equipment. Her research on interspecies communication had taken an unexpected turn after meeting Connor. Perfect timing, she greeted them, handing Connor a small pair of binoculars. They just entered the meadow about 10 minutes ago. Connor took the binoculars but didn't raise them to his eyes. Instead, he closed his eyes for a moment, a look of concentration crossing his features. Then he pointed to a copse of trees to the left of the meadow. They're over there now. Rusty smelled us and is bringing them closer. Dr. Morgan made a note in her research journal. She had learned to trust Connor's insights, documenting them alongside her more traditional observations. Sure enough, within minutes, the bear family emerged from exactly where Connor had indicated. The mother and 3 cubs following the large male as he led them to a fallen log about 100 yards from the observation blind. Remarkable, Dr. Morgan murmured, adjusting her camera. That's the 7th consecutive visit where they've approached the observation area within minutes of your arrival. Through the binoculars, Jacob watched as Rusty sat on his haunches, facing directly toward them while the cubs tumbled and played around the log under their mother's watchful eye. The male bear's posture was almost human, attentive, aware, recognizing. He says they're all doing well, Connor announced, lowering his binoculars. The cubs are learning to fish. The smallest one is the best at it. He giggled suddenly. He says to tell Dad that he should learn to fish too. Dad's not very good at it. Jacob laughed despite himself. He had indeed tried unsuccessfully to fish in the preserve's stocked pond during their last visit, much to everyone's amusement. Anything else? Dr. Morgan asked, recording Connor's statements. Connor focused again, his expression serious beyond his years. He says, there are bad people coming to the forest. People with loud machines and things that hurt the trees. Ranger Reed frowned. Logging equipment? There's no authorized logging in this sector. He's worried, Connor continued. The loud machines are getting closer to where they live. Dr. Morgan and Ranger Reed exchanged concerned glances. Could be illegal logging or land clearance, the ranger said quietly. We've had reports of incursions at the north boundary. Can you show us where, Connor? Dr. Morgan asked gently. Connor closed his eyes again, then pointed to an area on the small topographical map the ranger always carried. Here, where the river bends. Ranger Reed's expression hardened. That's conservation land. No one should be cutting there. She pulled out her radio. I need to report this. If Connor's right, he usually is, Lily said softly, then we need to investigate immediately. As the ranger stepped away to make her call, Dr. Morgan continued to document the bear's behavior. The cubs were now attempting to climb the fallen log, with the smallest repeatedly sliding off to land in a confused heap at the bottom. Connor laughed, the sound carrying across the clearing. Immediately, all 4 bears looked directly toward the observation blind. The cubs stopped playing, and the mother tensed slightly. "It's okay," Connor whispered, though there was no way the bears could hear him at this distance. "It's just me." Remarkably, the mother bear relaxed, and the cubs resumed their play. Rusty, however, continued to stare directly at their position, his intelligent eyes seeming to find Connor despite the concealment of the blind. "I've never seen anything like this," Dr. Morgan admitted. "In all my years studying bear behavior, I've never witnessed this level of awareness, this apparent recognition." Jacob placed a protective hand on Connor's shoulder. "Does it have to be understood to be real?" he asked. Dr. Morgan smiled. "That's what makes it science, Mr. Bennett. We observe, document, and try to understand, even if it challenges everything we thought we knew." Ranger Reed returned, her expression grim. "Patrol units are heading to the coordinates Connor indicated. Apparently, there have been reports of machinery in that area, but no one knew exactly where to look." She looked down at Connor with newfound respect. "You may have just helped save a significant portion of protected forest." Connor shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "I didn't do anything. Rusty told me." "And how exactly does he tell you these things, Connor?" Dr. Morgan asked, her recorder still running. It was a question she had asked before in different ways, trying to understand the mechanics of his communication. "It's like—" Connor frowned, searching for words to explain something that came naturally to him. "It's like when your tummy feels funny before something bad happens, or when you know someone's looking at you without seeing them. Except, with Rusty, it's pictures and feelings in my head. Not words exactly, but I understand anyway." It was the clearest explanation he had given yet, and Jacob saw Dr. Morgan quickly making notes. "Empathic resonance," she murmured. "Fascinating." Their observation continued for another hour, the bears going about their natural behaviors while occasionally looking toward the blind, especially when Connor moved or spoke. Finally, Rusty stood on all 4s and gave what appeared to be a deliberate nod in their direction before leading his family back into the deeper forest. "He says goodbye," Connor translated unnecessarily. "They need to find more berries before sunset." As they packed up their equipment and prepared to leave, Ranger Reed received an update on her radio. They found the illegal logging operation exactly where Connor indicated. 4 men with portable equipment already cleared about an acre. They've been apprehended. "The bears will be safe now?" Connor asked anxiously. "Yes, thanks to you and Rusty," the ranger assured him. "Their territory won't be disturbed." On the hike back to the visitor center, Dr. Morgan walked beside Jacob and Lily while Connor chatted animatedly with Ranger Reed about the different animal tracks they spotted on the trail. "I've been thinking about Connor's gift," the biologist said quietly, "about what it could mean on a larger scale." "We're not interested in publicity," Lily said firmly. "We've already had to move once because of the viral video from 2 years ago. Connor deserves a normal childhood." "I completely understand and respect that, Doctor," Morgan assured her. "But consider this. Connor can detect threats to wildlife before they become critical. He can understand animal behavior in ways scientists have spent lifetimes trying to decode. With proper guidance and protection, he could become a bridge between our world and theirs." Jacob watched his son pointing out a woodpecker to Ranger Reed, his small face alight with joy. "He's just a little boy," he said softly. His gift is remarkable, yes, but he's still Connor. Our son. Dr. Morgan nodded. Of course. And that should always come first. I'm simply suggesting that as he grows, this ability could help protect the natural world in unprecedented ways. She hesitated. If you're open to it, the university has a youth mentorship program. Nothing formal, nothing public, just guidance and resources to help Connor develop his connections with nature. On your terms, of course. Jacob and Lily exchanged looks, having one of those silent conversations that long-married couples perfect. We'll think about it, Lily said finally, but Connor's well-being comes first. Always, Dr. Morgan agreed. Back at the visitor center, they said their goodbyes to Ranger Reed and Dr. Morgan, promising to return next month for their regular visit. As they walked to their car, Connor suddenly stopped, looking back toward the forest with an expression of contentment that seemed far too mature for his young face. "What is it, buddy?" Jacob asked, crouching beside him. "Rusty says we're family now," Connor said simply. "Not the same kind of family, but still family, connected." He placed a hand over his heart. "In here." Jacob pulled his son into a hug, feeling a lump form in his throat. "Yes," he whispered, "connected." Over Connor's shoulder, Jacob could have sworn he saw a dark shape at the forest's edge, a large bear standing on its hind legs, watching them. But when he blinked, there was nothing there but trees swaying gently in the afternoon breeze. As they drove home, Connor fell asleep in his car seat, the excitement of the day finally catching up to him. Lily reached across the console to take Jacob's hand. "He's going to change the world someday, isn't he?" she said softly. Jacob nodded, thinking of all they had witnessed over the past 6 months. The seemingly impossible connection between their son and the wild,